What is web accessibility testing, and how do we test for accessibility? If you are new to accessibility, you are probably wondering how you can go about testing your site or application, in which case, then your heart and mind are in the right place. But before we dive too deep into an audit, it's important to first understand what web accessibility testing means and how we do it. And if you stick around, I will share how to create a report based on your accessibility testing audit. If you are just getting started, I recommend you first watch the video about WCAG and WCAG compliance, as well as the video about screen readers, as they will both provide foundational information for what we are about to be talking about in this video. The biggest problem that I tend to come across when people do accessibility testing is that they rely way too much on automated testing. Within the industry, we tend to say that automated accessibility testing will only find 30 to 40% of the potential accessibility issues within any given page. This is a problem because if people only do automated testing, then they will probably miss more than 60% of the issues within any given page. But with that warning out of the way, let's talk about what accessibility testing is. At its core, accessibility testing is going through a site or page and looking for potential accessibility obstacles. A good way of thinking about this is to consider the different ways that people might access the content and then testing it out to ensure that there are no obstacles. With two top priority manual tests, we will address most of these concerns. In particular, we do keyboard testing and then we test again with a keyboard and a screen reader. It is critical that you do these tests separately because the screen reader slightly changes the functionality of the keyboard, which may result in hiding some potential issues. Testing with a keyboard is important because most alternative input methods beyond the keyboard will track back to keyboard-like events. So if we ensure that the functionality works with the keyboard, it will likely work with the alternative input devices that we may not have. What we are mainly testing for with keyboard accessibility testing is that we can get to all the interactive elements on the page and that they work with the keyboard alone. For example, if there is a button that you can click with your mouse, but you can't tab to it with the keyboard or activate it with the enter key, then that is a serious concern. Testing with a screen reader is important because it is the most well-known assistive technology, and because of the way it functions, it helps us spot issues that we may have missed earlier on with our automated testing or our keyboard testing. When we are doing accessibility testing with a screen reader, we are again ensuring that we can access all of the content, but we also listen to make sure that all the interactive elements have unique and meaningful labels. If, for example, you have a button that visually says submit, but when you tab to it with the keyboard, the screen reader says only button, then you know you have a problem. Now let's get into the testing process. The first thing we need to do is agree on the WCAG or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version that we will be testing against. In most cases, I'd suggest the most recent version of the WCAG, which is currently 2.2. Next, we want to consider what level of conformance we are testing against. Again, in most cases, you'll be testing against the AA standard because when it comes to the law, this is usually the standard that we are aiming for. Now that we know we are testing against WCAG 2.2 AA standard, the next step is to decide what kind of testing you are going to do. The two main types of testing that I tend to do are spot checks or complete audits. But it's going to depend on several factors, including how much time you have, how cooperative your team is, and what your project management's expectations are. With spot check accessibility testing, we are going to first pick some random pages on our site and run some automated tests. I'd recommend using either the Wave evaluation tool or the Axe dev tools. For the most part, these tools are going to find the same sorts of issues, so it's a matter of preference. I would say that the main difference between the two is that Wave is more visually based, while Axe is more text based. But it's worth trying them both out and deciding which one works best for you. Once you've used your automated tool of choice, you are going to need to review all the issues that it has identified and ensure that they are real web accessibility issues. This takes some practice, and it would help if you have some experience with front-end development, as that will help you sort out what the issues are and how you may want to go about resolving them. Automated tests are good at telling you if your images are missing alt text, but they won't help you figure out if the alt text is any good. For that, you will need a human. These sorts of tests will also help you spot HTML syntax issues. For example, if you have a list coded incorrectly or you are using ARIA incorrectly, these tests will easily spot those sorts of issues. After you have identified all the issues found by the automated accessibility testing tool, you need to keep track of them somewhere. I find it helpful to take a screenshot of the element and code in question and then explain the issue in some text below the image. I usually put it all into a document so it's easier to edit and share later on. Now we want to do our keyboard testing. To do this, we want to be using the Tab key to move down the page, the Enter key, the space bar, the arrow keys and the Shift plus Tab key to move up the page. What we are going to do is press the tab and follow the focus state through the page. If you aren't sure what I mean by focus state, you are usually looking for a blue box around the currently focused interactive element. But keep in mind, this is something that can be customized, so it could look different on different pages, though it should be consistent throughout a site or application. The main objective of keyboard testing is to ensure that we can get through the page in a Z pattern. This means that focus is moving from the left-hand side of the page to the right-hand side of the page, then it is going from the top of the page to the bottom of the page. We are also looking for any situations where focus jumps around the page, breaking the Z pattern, or we are looking to see if the focus state skips over interactive elements like buttons, links, and form fields. When we get to a button or another interactive element, we need to make sure that it works with the keyboard. If it's a button, pressing Enter or space should activate it. If it's a link, then only the Enter key should activate it. If we come across a drop down, we want to ensure that we can use the arrow keys to select a value. This should also be the case with radio buttons. Places where you are likely to find issues are with custom components like date pickers. With these sorts of components, we need to ensure that we can pick a date just as easily with the keyboard as you could with the mouse. I would say 9 times out of 10, if you have a customized date picker, there's going to be some kind of problem that requires some special attention. At this point, you want to take notes of all the issues that you have found with your keyboard testing. Once again, I tend to take a screenshot of the issue and make notes under it explaining what the problem is. But sometimes, you might just have to write something like, I can't pick a date with the keyboard. Now that you have tracked down all the issues with the keyboard, it's now time to test with a screen reader. And if you haven't yet, I'd recommend checking out my video on screen readers and how they work. With screen reader accessibility testing, we are going to do pretty much the same tests that we did with the keyboard, but this time we are listening for what the screen reader says. You will probably want to slow down the speed of the screen reader so that you can pick up what it is saying. But with these tests, we are listening to make sure that what is said by the screen reader makes sense, is appropriate for the element, is unique, and matches up with what we visually see. The most common issues that we find here is that the visual information doesn't match with what the screen reader says. So we may have a button that has a plus icon within it, but when we go to that button with the screen reader, it just says button. Other issues we might find is that we have images without appropriate alt text, or alt text that doesn't match the text within the image itself. After we have done this testing, we once again need to log all our issues, but it will be important to provide lots of details for the screen reader accessibility issues, even including your testing procedure, because it is very likely that your devs haven't used a screen reader before, so they won't understand the issues that you have identified. Now that you have completed your spot check, you've probably spotted many of the most obvious issues that a user might run into. However, it is important to keep in mind that this is not a complete audit and will not have identified all the potential issues that a user might run into, which brings us to the second option for testing, a complete audit. I will not go into all the details of a complete audit, but for this kind of testing, we need to look at the WCAG requirements and test against each of the success criteria. Keep in mind this will be a very time-consuming task, but it will help you identify almost all of the potential violations within your site. To do a complete audit, I recommend checking out the WCAG EM report tool, which I will link to in the description of this video. With this tool, you define your scope, the WCAG version, the conformance level, and the automated tools you will be using to test. You will also include the assistive technologies and which browsers you are going to use. Next, you will need to play around with the site a little to get a sense of what it is all about and what the main functionalities are. If you are already working on the project, this step should be easy, but at the end of the task, you're going to want to have a representative sample of all the pages and components to test and work with. Finally, and this is the hard part, you need to go through your pages and test out all the WCAG requirements. This will take some time because you will need to understand the requirements and what the outcomes are. For each of the requirements, you're going to need to select if it passes or fails, or if you didn't test it at all. Then you will want to put some notes in the observations section. When you are finished testing everything, you can click on the View Report button, and you will have a report which you can share with your team. Again, this will take a lot of time, especially if you are new, but after doing this a couple of times, you'll have a better understanding of what you're looking for, and it will get easier. So that is how we do accessibility testing. There's a lot to keep in mind here, so watch this video again if you missed anything, and leave a comment below if you have any questions. Thanks for watching, and if you found this helpful, click that like button and subscribe for more content like this.